So I just pasted in the chat a chant we can use this morning. It's the one we often use at the center, the Four Quarters chant. But I thought we would just do the verse on equanimity, which is such a provocative invitation for our heart to be equanimous, balanced when so much is moving. Hopefully, not just difficult experience, but beautiful, pleasant experience, at least at times. And just to open our mind to the possibility that a beautiful balance, an engaged balance, a peaceful balance, an exposed and intimate balance is really possible in the midst of the 10,000 joys and sorrows of life. So we'll do this chant and then we'll sit for about 30 minutes. So find that in the chat if you don't know it. And let's begin. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with equanimity. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, and without ill will. And take the time you need, listen to the body, make adjustments. We'll settle into our sitting time now. And we are willing to make peace with what we feel. It can be sometimes even surprising as we take the time to settle and to somewhat at least still the body in an upright but relaxed posture. It can be surprising to discover what we feel moving in the body, alive in the body. But whatever it is that we're feeling, we can know this isn't a mistake. It's the way it is right now in the body. And not just the grosser level of physical sensations related to sitting and related to the temperature in the room and the clothes we're wearing and the way we're sitting, but also the more subtle energetic qualities that are here, emotional qualities, the way it feels now in the heart, hard or soft, open or closed, fiery or cool, loving or aversive, irritated. And we're not thinking that we have to judge or we have to fix. We have a more pure or wholesome intention, which is just to connect, to have a real relationship with the way it is, right here, right now. And even here in the beginning of our sit, we can have a little flavor of how liberating it is to relate in a balanced way, in a forgiving way, in a patient way, in a fearless way with whatever is being felt, whatever is moving now. We don't have to fall into the habit of being contentious, thinking that something is here to be fixed. Whatever version of the if only, then this experience would be better. But we're practicing being content with the conditions that are here, with the way that it is. With a reflection, something like, is it safe to relax now? Is it okay simply to allow the mind to be the way it is, the body to be the way it is? Is it possible for me now to be relating to the experience here in the moment in a really beautiful, healing way, in a really simple way that's beautiful and healing? As the Buddha says, as all the nuns and monks in the early Buddhist tradition chant probably every day, they honor the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And when they're doing the section on appreciating the Dhamma, they chant that the Dhamma, it's here and now. It's timeless, can't be taken away. So whatever heart's release that we intuit in life, it's here and now. And this really makes the heart interested in the present moment. There's something here and now. So we're not afraid of whatever heartache, whatever sensations we might feel in the body. Because there's some intuition that I can show up in a way that's really beautiful and healing and liberating. There's a way to be understanding or relating, or a way to be aware. It really delivers the peace and the freedom and the love that the heart intuits is available right now, right here. And in a way, the whole path is simply to follow this subtle thread of inner pleasure, spiritual pleasure, healing pleasure, of being intimate, being unafraid, being accepting of these conditions in this moment. Letting everything move. So we're not repressing, we're not suppressing really. We're bringing a new understanding to all that's moving now in the body, in our hearts, in our minds. So in this way, our meditation object is the movement of our life moment by moment. Life, this experience as a human being, is a river, a movement of feeling, of bodily sensations moving, thoughts moving. Can we value keeping this in mind without feeling pushed around or in need of reacting or fixing, but to learn how to be in the river of our life, of our living body, living heart, living mind. What a relief it is not to have to direct, not even needing to judge or have an idea of how it is for me. I don't even need to construct that idea. I can just let the flow be the flow. Let all the currents be the currents. And when the mind does get tripped up and feels like it has to do something, fix something, think something, define something, then the job of the meditator is to see that self-centered activity as just part of the flow. A kind of, oh, of course, this is what the thinking mind does. It plans, it tries to fix, it tries to define, explain, analyze. This is just thinking being known. Worrying being known, planning being known, judging being known. Can this be okay? Yeah, it's okay that things are moving. Even unskillful thoughts. Everything has permission now to come and go. So we'll continue in silence now. And we'll be sitting for another few minutes. And in a way, the meditation object is the balance, the spacious balance in how the heart is relating to the river of our life, the river, the movement of sensation and thought and emotion. Keeping in mind the peace, peacefulness, the balance, the kindness, and the great allowing these movements to move, allowing life, in a sense, to move through. And even when things feel tight or constricted, letting that also be the experience of movement. This is how it is now. Life moving through. Maybe it's okay to be feeling this, to be knowing this. And if you can, to whatever degree you can, notice this beautiful, soft power of being present and open in a balanced way, letting everything come and go. There's something both soft and powerful, stable about this way of being, this way of relating. You could call it fearlessness. You could call this being real, grounded. Take a little time and adjust your body so you'll be comfortable for the talk and showing up for each other. So nice to be back. I've spent most of the last 5 weeks out at Common Ground's retreat property at Prairie Farm, Wisconsin, and on retreat myself the last 2.5 weeks or so. So just returned yesterday. Really grateful to Shelley Graff, who taught a couple weeks back, and Wynn Fricky, who taught last week. Most of you know, I'm sure, that Shelley regularly teaches on Wednesday night. You can always catch their talks then. And Wynn we don't see as often, but Wynn is leading the community practice check-in on Saturday morning once a month that we do together. And then when Wynn's not busy at McAllister College teaching, we get her to teach here at Common Ground from time to time. She's here with me this morning. Yeah, and it's just having been on retreat, and just especially because of the COVID virus, Common Ground's retreat property is very quiet. A lot of the time it was just 2 or 3 of us, Matthew King, our caretaker, and then 1 or 2 other practice leaders doing their practice. So it's pretty quiet. And what do you think you notice, for those who haven't done a lot of silent meditation retreats? What do we notice when even we have just a little bit of quiet, unstructured time, nothing to do, no one at home? Right? We see what the mind is doing all the other time. One of the basic premises of learning about the mind, or learning about anything really, is we learn things best when there's a contrast, right? So when we have a lot of quiet, we notice noise and agitation. But if the mind, body and mind, let's say, is really not quiet, really agitated, we don't notice agitation when we're agitated because it doesn't stand out. But when we're in a really quiet room, we notice all the noises, all the subtle noises that all day long we won't notice. But when the room's quiet, then we hear the fridge buzzing, we hear the mice, like at Prairie Farm, scratching in the internal walls. Not a lot, but a few. And all those other sort of more subtle things that we tend to miss. And so today I want to talk about this very normal, in a way unavoidable reality of mental proliferation, what we commonly call thinking. Have you noticed? That's what the mind, or one of the things the mind does. It thinks, it plans, it worries, it speculates, it wonders, it compares, it judges, it hates, it loves, fantasizes, it regurgitates the past and imagines the future. It's just really amazing. I sometimes characterize this part of the mind as like an amazing production studio. Some of you probably have been out at Spirit Rock Meditation Center just north of San Francisco. Really beautiful piece of land. One of our sort of motherships in our early Buddhist tradition here in the West of Vipassana or insight meditation community in the West is this meditation center, founded by people like James Baraz and Sylvia Borstein and Jack Hornfield and others. And if you're on the ridge overlooking the retreat center, it's pretty far up. It's the coastal foothills, not too far from the Pacific Ocean, Point Reyes, if you know that part, a national park there. But anyway, on the ridge, if you look down one way, you see Spirit Rock, and if you look down the other way of the ridge, you see the Lucas Ranch, where Lucas, the person who produced the initial Star Wars series, and then this amazing production studio where they could, do all the graphics and all the makeup stuff, right, with computers. And initially, they just had little models that they filmed, and then as the technology improved, they could just make up anything with computer models and graphics. And that's like our mind. It has this amazing production studio, and much more impressive than any, as impressive as Hollywood is these days, what our mind can do. I mean, just like every night when we dream, that's pretty impressive. How we can just completely manufacture reality that it's, almost always, it's so seductive, it's so intoxicating, we don't realize that this is just a construction of the mind. And this whole idea of a dream, it's a very useful metaphor for a lot of what we're waking up, because we somehow imagine that this is distinctly different from when we're dreaming. But we don't realize how much of this experience right now that each of us are having is related to a production studio and that act of constructing meaning, constructing reality. And so in Buddhism, in early Buddhism, there's this concept of papancha, is the Pali word for mental proliferation. And it's this way that we notice, I'm sure you've noticed, and especially in more quiet moments, is how we'll have a thought, including something seemingly skillful like, I'm thinking too much. Why am I thinking about this? I don't need to be thinking about that. Now that thought seems to be skillful, right? On the surface at least. But then if I have that thought, like, oh, why am I thinking about this? I don't need to think about this. And then what does the mind do? It starts to think about why I'm thinking about this. Why does this always come up? Is there something I haven't seen about this? What's the underlying feeling? So like, even if it's all Buddha speak, using the language of our practice, but we can endlessly proliferate. Often this sort of Dharma coach or this obsessing, thinking about practice, even like I mentioned sometimes on retreat that I'll have like a metta fantasy where I'm sort of making up beautiful stories of people being nice to each other, but like on steroids, like really provocative, meaningful imaginings of people doing nice things and healing broken relationships and getting along, and that's proliferation, that's mental proliferation. And on and on and on it goes. Because what we discover in the end is the thing the mind is addicted to more than anything is the intensity of constructing what appears to be reality. That's our drug of choice, right? Getting high, we're getting high all the time on this capacity the mind has to construct meaning and then to be deluded by the meaning. There's different stories in the tradition, including one about 3 magicians traveling together in the woods, probably bragging about their amazing powers of magic. And so they see some bones of a tiger that, had been dead for a long time, and all the flesh was gone, just some old bones years later from the tiger. And like one of the magicians to brag says, well, I can bring all these bones together and make a full skeleton. So he does his magic, and there's the skeleton of the tiger. And the second magician says, you think that's good? I can magically make the flesh come back. And so all the flesh, it's like, the perfect taxidermic tiger sitting there like you see sometimes in a museum. And then the third magician says, you think that's impressive? I can make that tiger come alive. And then what does the tiger do? Eat them up. Even though it's like an act of magic. And this is in the tradition, in the early Buddhist tradition, these kinds of stories, you've probably heard me tell a similar story, some of you have been around for a while, about the magic tree, where I always talk about person who's hot, finds a shady tree, really lovely shady tree, sits underneath. Well, this is nice. There wasn't trees for miles, but now there's this beautiful shade tree. I wonder if there's any good fruit to eat. And all of a sudden he notices all this fruit in the tree. Oh, be nice to share this food with someone. All of a sudden a nice, attractive person shows up. Oh, it'd be nice to have someone to serve the food. And, on and on like this, and then wonders, this is a little suspicious that everything I want shows up. I wonder if there's a demon in the tree. Sure enough, a demon appears. I wonder if that demon's going to eat me up. Sure enough, the demon eats him up. And this is the thing about having an amazing production studio. We can imagine heavens, really nice situations. I mean, even today, maybe you've imagined your lunch as what's going to save you. Hey, oh, for lunch today, it's Sunday, I'm going to, do this special thing. And that's going to make my life worth living for the next few hours or whatever, we're imagining doing. Or we're imagining some hellish thing going on that really disturbs our heart. And on and on. And it's sort of when we, in a sense, step back and observe how the mind constructs stuff, gets seduced by its own constructions, and then feeds, in the deepest sense, it's feeding on the juiciness of that attachment. We're actually, surprisingly or ironically, we're feeding on the dukkha, on the suffering, the stress of being entranced in the movie. Just like when we're watching a horror film or even a kind of meaningful drama where it's, in some kind of realistic way, just showing the ups and downs of human life. And we're feeling every up and down that that character in the film is going through, or the character in the novel is going through. We feel it. And yet, in a way, we feel enlivened by the attachment to the ups and downs. And we're strangely afraid of the absence of that drama. And this should get interesting for us. Like, just to map out our situation as a human being without judgment and without reflexively thinking the Buddha teachings are correct, but just to get curious about our relationship to intensity, to drama, and the constriction, the tightness in our heart that goes with that. Like, if anything nice happens to you today, just notice that we get tight when nice stuff happens. We get excited, right? We get hopeful. And if we just are in our body, notice what it's like to be excited without judging or telling ourselves, oh, I shouldn't be tight. Just get curious about it. And how it's there when we're high or positive or hopeful, how it's there when we're afraid or upset or mad. And we're just getting, oh, this is the deal with ordinary human, what the Buddha calls worldly existence, a normal, ordinary, worldly existence where we're living to feed on our experiences. And with some understanding, we realize our experiences are being constructed in our own heart. It's not so much the Buddha saying there isn't an external reality. He's just saying, in terms of suffering and the end of suffering, what's relevant is our experience. And our experience is here in our heart, in our mind. This is where experience arises. This is where experience is felt. So all the injustices in the world, all the beauty and goodness in the world, that's being experienced here and now in our heart and mind. And so learning how to be with the world and learning how to be with our body and our life, that also happens here and now in our mind and heart. This is the whole deal right here. And this is the great irony. We are here together alone in our own heart and mind, each of our own hearts and mind, together. And we don't have to explain that. We just have to get honest about it. Because explaining it takes us in that realm of mental proliferation where we think that my conceptual map or my conceptual explanation to myself or explanation to you is the thing itself. But the thing itself is our experience right now. That's the thing itself. And any map, any conceptualization is only useful if it's telling us that the thing itself is our experience. That's what we need to be real with intimate with. But if we get confused by our story, our maps, then we we can get seduced into being disconnected. And when we're disconnected from the way it is, the reality of here and now, then we're in that samsaric, maybe you've heard that word samsara, the cycling, the whirlpools of our drama, where we're having experience and thinking about experience, and our thinking about experience is the next experience, which we then think about. I was thinking about this morning. It's ironically, of course, to prepare a talk, you think. I was thinking about it this morning, and it's that old cliche, you know, if we're a hammer, if all we have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. So if we're identified, if the mind is really transfixed, identified with the thinking process, the analyzing, imagining, constructing process of this talent of producing meaning, conceptual meaning, then everything in our experience looks like something to think about. I see Shannon, she's showing up on my screen, and Alice, and a lot of you who I have history with. And then when I have that perception, the impulse is to think, oh, I know Alice, and on like that. Because that's what we do with experience. I step outside, it's cold, and all of those thoughts, it's like one teacher calls them like the makeup. You're putting up makeup, putting on a costume. So all of my past experience with weather and with cool temperature informs that moment I step outside and I feel the coldness, but it's all getting dressed up with all of those tendencies in my heart, and the production studio goes full time, and I'm having all kinds of thought. Well, it's, what do you expect? It's December 20th, it's supposed to be cold, and oh yeah, but there's global, and on and on. And it's not about whether the thoughts are skillful or unskillful. We're really talking at a more subtle level. We're inviting the mind to notice this mental proliferation, this word papancha. In one of the discourses, the Buddha talks about how this, some of you know Venerable Anuruddha, who was the Buddha's cousin, and he ordained after the Buddha's awakening. Then the Buddha eventually, a few years after his awakening, wandered through the area where he was raised, and several of his cousins then ordained as practitioners, Buddhist monks, and eventually some of the females in his family also ordained and became wise awakened ones, as we say in the tradition. And but anyway, this one cousin, Anuruddha, there's some really interesting stories about mental proliferation. So I'll just give you two stories. One is, let me just find it. Oh, here it is. One especially funny story is he was meditating, and you sort of practice on your own for a while, and then kind of hit a wall, and you'd go see one of the senior people, and if not the Buddha himself, maybe like Sariputta, Buddha's #1 chief disciple. So in this case, Anuruddha found Sariputta, and it was sort of like a practice check-in. Like some of you who've been on retreat, some retreats you get a one-to-one meeting with the teacher, and you show up, and you have your 5 or 10 minutes, and you sort of tell the person, okay, when I'm sitting or when I'm just going about my day, this is what happens, this is how I'm aware of what's happening, and then this is what happens. And you kind of give a blow by blow of what it's like to have this kind of mind doing what this kind of mind does. And then the teacher hopefully intuits sort of maybe what you're not seeing and points you in that direction. So Anuruddha sits down with Venerable Sariputta, the chief disciple of the Buddha, and he's a pretty impressive meditator. So this is how he reports his meditation, right? I can see the 1,000-fold world system. So basically he's saying, I'm psychic. Wherever I direct my attention, I see it. I want to know what's going on in Russia, I see it. So that's pretty impressive. And then he says, strenuous and unshaken is my energy. right? He has unbroken persistence. He doesn't get tired. And then he says, mindfulness is set up, is established in me, untroubled. So the stability of mindfulness, unwavering mindfulness. My body is calmed and not perturbed. He's feeling pretty tranquil. He's feeling good too, right? It's pleasant. My mind is collected, still, one-pointed, right, in the present moment. Yet for all of that, my heart is not released from the asavas. And so the word asava means either gets translated as outflows or influxes, right? It's just the cycling, the whirlpools of drama. They're still going on. They might be more subtle, right, than some ordinary folks who aren't super meditators like myself. But I realize I'm still suffering as a human being. My mind's still not released, right? Not free from grasping. Now so Sariputta is like, these are really short meetings, which is really impressive, you know. They might have been away from a teacher for months, and just in a 5-minute interaction or less, the teacher knows just what to say. And this is just like so wonderful, this short response that Sariputta has to Venerable Anuruddha. As to your statement about seeing the thousand-fold world systems, that is just your conceit, right? Yeah, I see the thousand, right? So it's like, oh yeah, you're seeing something, but what's really going on is like that ownership of that power, right? As to your statement about being strenuous and unshaken and so forth, that is just arrogance. Now don't think of this as Sariputta judging. He's just sort of changing the lens on how Anuruddha should see what's going on. As to your statement about your heart not being released from the asavas, from the ongoing flows of the mind, that's just worrying or mental proliferation. It would indeed be well for you if you were to abandon these three conditions, if you were not to think about them, to proliferate around them, but were to focus your mind on the deathless element. And this brings me to the point that I wanted to really center the talk around, where the Buddha, in the next story with Venerable Anuruddha, this involves the Buddha. And this is before Anuruddha himself became another one of the awakened ones, right? Finished his practice, had the same insight that the Buddha had, same release of the heart, unshakable release of the heart. And so again, Venerable Anuruddha, who's sort of known for being a really hotshot meditator, like a lot of concentration. And you can get sort of spellbound by your own powerful mind and concentrated mind. So here's Venerable Anuruddha meditating, and what arises in this very concentrated mind are some really wholesome thoughts. And here are the thoughts that arose in Anuruddha's mind while meditating. This practice, this Dhamma, is for one with few desires, not for one with strong desires. This practice is for one who is content, not for one who is not content. This practice is for one who appreciates solitude, not for one who delights in complications, social complications. This practice is for one who's energetic, not for one who is lazy. This practice is for one with the stability of mindfulness, not for one who is muddled-minded. This practice is for one who is concentrated, not for one unconcentrated. This practice is for one who is wise, not unwise. And there's different variations of this story, but either the Buddha psychically realizes what's going on in Anuruddha's meditation, or another way the story is told is Anuruddha went to the Buddha eventually, and we had one of those practice meetings and sort of said, I was practicing and these 7 thoughts arose in my mind. And the Buddha, now it's a perfect example, in about 1 minute, the Buddha gives him a very powerful instruction. And you see what a great teacher is, because the Buddha doesn't sort of say, hey, you're just thinking about stuff you don't need to think about, which is sort of what he means, but he does it in a nice way. He basically says, these are the thoughts of a great man, right, or a great person. He says that to Anuruddha. He sort of acknowledges, yeah, Those are very beautiful, wise thoughts. Good job, Anuruddha. And then he says, let me give you an eighth thought to think about. And this is really the take home from the talk today. And he says to Anuruddha, this practice is for one who delights in non-proliferation, who takes delight in non-proliferation, right? Who takes delight in non-proliferation, not for one who likes proliferation. Now that's enough. Just that little gem is enough for us to take away from this talk today. As you go about your day to day, as the next time you have some silent time to do a 30-minute meditation or whatever, then just bring up that little gem from the practice meeting that Venerable Anuruddha had with the Buddha 2,500 years ago, where he sees that Venerable Anuruddha has got a lot of concentration, a lot of wholesomeness, but he's kind of spellbound by his own beautiful thoughts about the practice and caught in his own little wholesome, relatively wholesome whirlpool of mental proliferation. I mean, we could be thinking about how nobody likes me, or how can I be the all-powerful one where everybody does what I want, right? There are a lot of whirlpools of thinking that aren't so wholesome than the kind of whirlpool that Venerable Anuruddha was caught in. But the Buddha gives him this little gem. How about thinking about, contemplating, using the thought as a jumping off point? Like, what is the reality of non-proliferation? So then immediately, like I said at the beginning of the talk, when I'm interested in non-proliferation, I really start noticing proliferation. When I'm interested in not hitching the next conceptual train, where one thought leads to the next, and then I start noticing all those on-ramps, all those trains. I could think about this, I could worry about that, I could plan this, I could think about lunch, I could think about lunch for the rest of the week, an omelet on Monday, cheese sandwich on Tuesday, just on and on like that. It's amazing what we think about. One of my best friends who recently passed away, longtime meditation buddy, someone who taught in the very early years of Common Ground. We used to teach the intro class together, Paul Knorr, back in the mid-90s. But I remember back then in the mid-90s, we were coming back from a retreat, driving back from a 9-day retreat together. And Paul said, yeah, during that retreat, it's like my mind took hold of this need to absolutely figure out the top 20 movies of all time in the correct order. And it's like these little obsessions, like I got to figure, and Paul was a really great meditator in terms of just experience and depth of practice. But we get in these loops that just feels like, this is what I meant about the hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when one of the deep habits is we've become over-reliant on using thinking to resolve, especially the deeper issues, existential issues of life. And this is, I remember this sort of insight. I have to admit, I was a little bit under the influence of something, which I won't talk about right now. This is way back in like 82. And, but up in the mountains in Alaska with a couple good spiritual buddies, just beginning my meditation practice, so still with some other habits of mind. And, but I really saw this loop, the mind chasing its own tail, mental proliferation. I really saw it for what it is, not leading anywhere. Endlessly not leading anywhere, yet always thinking, always feeling like that's the next thing to do. So like even when I really was clear that the mind was chasing its own tail, what did the mind want to do? It wanted to think about that the mind is chasing its own tail. It's always the same thing. The mind thinks, whenever it has an insight, let me think about it. Whenever it has a problem, let me think about this. Whenever things are going well, let me think about why things are going well or how things are going well. Or that's our go-to response to everything, is to proliferate and then in a way to be spellbound by our own mental proliferation. Either spellbound by being disgusted by it, being bored by it, that's being caught in our own mental constructions, or being entranced by it, thinking that that's the most wonderful thought, most important thought. Another very common experience of people who do longer meditation retreats is because we're not supposed to read much or write or take notes but we get good ideas, and so we're okay, I'll just jot this down. And so at the end of a month-long retreat or a couple-week retreat or whatever, even a weekend retreat, you have a long list. Okay, don't forget this. Do this when I get home. And the interesting thing, those thoughts seem so brilliant, so important. And when you get home, you might have a list of 20 things. Maybe one or two will be something you'll follow through with. And even because you're following through doesn't mean it was worth following through. But it's just so amazing how something can seem important in the moment and turn up not to be so important. How many times have I thought, I need to say this to win? And it's like, really? And especially if I have too much caffeine, and then it's like so many things that need to be said to this person, to that person, need to be done. And so many of the world's problems and issues naturally resolve themselves if we just give a little bit of space. I'm not saying there aren't things we need to say to people, but a lot of it just naturally will come up gracefully, naturally in conversations without the mind having to make a point to do or say or fix. But there will be just natural opportunities to resolve what needs to be resolved. And this is really conducive of faith when we see this about life, that we don't have to fix everything. So this is our encouragement, with our practice, is it's not so much about repressing the thinking mind. It's really wishing, desiring in a wholesome way to understand it. What is this endless, this sort of sometimes raging beast, sometimes a very quiet, soothing. There's this new phenomenon, I'm sure most of you know this, but I'm a little behind the times in terms of like the YouTube world, but I forget what it's called, but where people are like whispering on these YouTube videos. I'm sure someone can post what all that stuff is called, where they use a quiet voice. And people find it really soothing to like have somebody talking to them in this sort of whispery voice. And so sometimes there it is, ASMR. Thanks, Roseanne. Does anybody know what that acronym stands for? I'm assuming it's an acronym. But in any case, it does something, like when a mother or grandmother or some caretaker is whispering, soothing, it's self-soothing. So sometimes mental proliferation has that sort of soothing quality. Sometimes it's a really harsh voice. Sometimes it's this brilliant Dharma voice that just has this, powerful clarity. And let me tell you the truth. This is how it is. Let me lay it out for you. And it's sort of that way. Sometimes it's a grumpy, irritated voice. Sometimes it's a nihilistic voice. Nothing matters. Who cares? I'm done. I'm out of here. So we have this mental proliferation can have many, many different voices, but in a way it all has the same voice, which is this, addiction, basically like those three magicians, where we construct something, we get enchanted by our construction, we get burnt, not because the mind constructed something, but because the mind misunderstood the mental construction. We don't have to get rid of the production studio. First of all, we can't, right? That just comes with taking birth. But we don't need to get confused by what our mind constructs. And I'll leave us with this last image. This is from a series, really powerful series of Dharma talks by Venerable K. Nyanananda. He's a Sri Lankan Buddhist monk who died, I think maybe in the 80s, but a couple decades back. And really amazing teacher, and Venerable Bhikkhu Analayo, this one of my teachers, he translated, and this is available at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies website, these series of 33 lectures on Nibbana, on the cessation of proliferation. That's one of the ways the Buddha defines Nibbana, the experience of the release of our heart. He defines it in a number of ways, including the mind not fixated, not caught up in proliferation, but instead delighting in non-proliferation, right? That's the takeaway. And so in that series of lectures, I think at lecture 11, if you're going to listen to it, it's both, you can read it, but you can also watch this German monk, one of my teachers, Venerable Analayo, read his transcription of Venerable Jnanananda's talk on Nibbana, talk number 11 in this case, where he uses this example over and over again, whether it's, sometimes he uses it as a magician show or just any really great theater. In a beautiful theater that of course is dark so that the lighting really stands out. And when we're watching a really good play, the props that they use, and even the 3-minute break between the second act and the third act, none of that really bothers us if it's a really well-written, well-acted play, right? We're just totally engrossed. We believe the scenery, we believe everything, we get caught up. And then he says, so you imagine you're watching one of those great plays and you're just totally there in the story, in the drama, and you're feeling it. That's called life, right? And then all of a sudden, let's say it's the middle of the day, all of a sudden, the walls and ceiling of the theater just disappear, including the internal walls of the theater. So all of a sudden, you see the stage folks behind the scenes, the lighter, but you see the city traffic, you hear the birds, the trees, the midday sun. You would be completely, very quickly disenchanted with the drama of the play. It just wouldn't grab the heart because there's like this whole scene of Minneapolis and traffic and kids playing in the playground and everything going on around us, right? And you'd notice the makeup on the actors and you'd see, oh, that's just the stool. That's not this thing that I was imagining that they were using to sort of represent some other thing, right? That they do in plays, just some set piece. And we lose that enchantment. And so this is the sort of resolution of this addiction we have to our mental constructions, is just to not to suppress them, but to understand that mental activity, thinking, planning, imagining, it's just that. And it's just one of the many aspects, the diversity of what's coming and going in the moment. And we don't have the mind, the heart doesn't need to come into a fixed or gripped relationship to how we make sense. So another way to think about this teaching, this little gem from the Buddha, this delighting in non-proliferation that I'm inviting us all to reflect on this week. Delighting in the non-proliferation of the thinking mind is not being dependent on any conceptual meaning. We're not afraid, like if the mind that thinks continues to think and continues to construct meaning, mental or conceptual meaning, fine, do that. But I'm practicing not being in need of meaning. Oh yeah. And so what is this heart, this mind, in this non-dependence on mental proliferation, this non-dependence on concepts, which is not the same as not having thought or concepts, but the non-gripping of them. And this is something we can just explore sitting on the couch, whenever there's just sort of a pause where we're not It's obviously harder to do this reflection when we're in the middle of a conversation, but even then, depending on the kind of conversation, we can be interested. Oh yeah, but that's a more graduate level of this practice. So in the beginning, just in those places where it's a little more simple and we're not talking, and we just notice that internal dialogue, and then we can explore the non-dependence and delighting in a way, in the sense, in the space between the thoughts, where the mind isn't dependent on thoughts or the meaning that thoughts construct. And I'll come back to the same topic next Sunday. Before turning it over to Shannon, I'll just mention too, so we're going to do our annual year-end retreat that will begin next Sunday evening, and I think it's almost full, if not full. But we'll still have the Sunday morning next week. And I'm not sure, but maybe Shelley will even do the Wednesday night, which would be like the 30th maybe. But just look at the public calendar to see if someone will be teaching that Wednesday evening as well. But for about 100 of us, we'll be on retreat together. But you'll just check the weekly calendar or the public calendar online for the programs. Most of the programs will continue now that we're on Zoom. We can have programs even during our year-end retreat, when in the past we'd have to close everything because we'd be in the building and there'd be no other room for other programs. And let me make Shannon the host now, if I can find Shannon.
Yeah, so anybody who wants to join for a quick, small group, there's always a lot to, let's not say mentally proliferate, but kind of consider after the Dharma talk. So if you'd like to join a small group of about 4 or 5 folks in the community, just to connect, all are welcome. Everyone else, please have a good week. Take care of yourself out there. Stay safe.
Yeah. So just stay online if you want to be in the small groups. Otherwise, we'll just take a minute to say goodbye to everybody via chat or a wave, and hope to see most of you next Sunday. Take care, everyone.